as you embark on this college search. I think we had were we going to ask some poll questions to our audience?
Yes, let's put this out here just so we know who is here tonight. Can give Heath an idea. What year is your student, or if you have multiple kiddos, just let us know who's listening in tonight. Coming in quickly. We'll keep it open for just a second.
Yeah, this is always really helpful.
Yeah, the right people are here.
So it's not all seniors?
No. No.
Sometimes that happens, and I have useful advice for parents of seniors as well.
And maybe they're just excited, and maybe they're already, committed. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share this. Here we go. Mostly juniors. Everybody's in the right spot for tonight. So
very cool.
Love that. And then
and I also love seeing that there are families of younger students as well. Mm-hmm. So just sort of getting a head start. And I hope that what we have to share tonight will really apply to everybody.
Absolutely. Well, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, fantastic. So what I'm going to do now is share my screen. Let's see if we can actually get this to work. Okay, good. I hope everyone can see the screen. You should see the slide that says where to start, how the process of college admission has changed. And a lot has changed, as I mentioned. We're going to, by the way, have some time at the end for some Q&A. So I hope not to talk the entire time. And I definitely want to make sure that all of your questions and concerns are addressed. But I really want to start with some basics. And we talk about college admission and the search that students and parents embark upon as being a quest for finding that right fit. Okay, and that's really important because there's a quote that has been going around the college admission world for the better part of the last 2 decades that says, college is a match to be made, not a prize to be won. And I really wholeheartedly believe in that idea, that every student who wants to seek post-secondary education will have that opportunity. And there are schools that are right for you. But the schools that are right for you as a student or you as the parent of students will not be the same for everybody. Okay, so I like to start with a story that I think is really kind of interesting and illustrative of this idea. So several years ago, probably 15 years ago now, I was a college counselor at an independent school, and in that role, my job was to help students and parents navigate this journey. So I had a group of students I worked with, and I remember this one young woman in particular, a very talented student, came into my office and she said, "Mr. Einstein, I want to go to a school that is in a geographically remote location in the Northeast, a beautiful campus. It's very small, a liberal arts college, or Stanford." And I said, "Okay, and why do you want to go to Stanford?" And she said, "Well," and she sort of straightened up and she said, "Stanford is the best." And I said, "For you?" And she said, "What?" And I said, "You mean because it's the best school for you?" And what families need to wrap their heads around at this point is there isn't just one right school. You're trying to find the best school for you. Okay, it's not Tinder. You're not just swiping left and swiping right. You're not just looking at like the picture of the place and figuring out what's right for you, but there are actually a lot of factors that go into what might make a school right for you. For some students, it's going to be the distance from home. For some students, it's going to be the academic programs offered. For other students, it's going to be, what do the residence halls look like? For some students, maybe it's, what is the athletic program like? Because I plan to participate in intercollegiate athletics. For other students, it might be Am I going to be in a big city or a really small town? So, and the list goes on. There are a host of factors that one might consider when determining what a school or a set of schools could look like. And that's why students who otherwise look identical, they might have the same grades, the same test scores, the same list of activities, might end up applying to a completely different set of schools. And even if you're interested in some of the same things, the priority scale might look different. So you might have a lot of the same interests, but for one student, having the best food is going to be just the most important thing. And if it doesn't have great food, it doesn't really matter about those other things. It could be the right location. It could be, they could have the sport I want. They could have all the activities, et cetera, but I have to have the great food. Someone else might say, yeah, food, I care about food, but that's like the 10th most important thing for me. So all of these things really matter. Okay. So let's start talking about what we call the admission funnel, okay? And I'll use throughout our time this evening, I'll be talking about college admission writ large, but I also want to give TCU as the example. And so using TCU as the example, we're looking at the end of the day, we're going to work backwards. At the end of the day, we want to make sure we have the right number of students starting here each fall. Okay. And when we go into our year, we start from the end and work backwards. So I know, for example, that for the fall 22 entering class, that is the class that we are currently in the admission process for, I know that I want to have roughly 2,200 first-year students coming to TCU come move in August. Okay, that's where we are. So I need us to be at 2,200 on May 1st. Okay, May 1st is the national candidate reply date. Most colleges will say you have until May 1st to tell us if you are enrolling at the institution. Okay, now I mentioned that we're bringing in a first-year class of 2,200 students. Of course, we're not only going to admit 2,200 students, we have to admit some number north of that, because not every student we offer admission to will take us up on that offer. Our what we call yield, that is the percentage of students who accept our offer of admission, our yield in most years is about 25%. That means for every 4 offers of admission I make, 1 of those students will end up coming to TCU, and 3 will make the mistake of going somewhere else. Okay, that's a joke, not a mistake. There are many, many great schools, but 3 will go to another school, 1 will come to TCU, okay? So that means if we want a first-year class of about 2,200 students, we're gonna have to have about 8,800 offers of admission, give or take, depending on the year. Okay. Now, of course, we don't only have 8,800 students who apply. If we did, then we would have to admit every student who applied to the university. So we actually will have, in most years, about 20,000 students apply for first-year admission. Okay, and that has increased at colleges all over the United States significantly in the last generation. So that's one thing that for certain has changed since the time that you and I applied to schools, is students are finding it easier to apply because of electronic submission of applications, a common application, and other application types that make it easy to apply to multiple schools at one time, a willingness perhaps to travel farther away from home, more uncertainty out there in how colleges are going to respond, which in turn sort of drives the number of applications that students submit. It used to be commonplace for a student to apply to 4 or 5 or 6 schools. Now it's not unheard of for students to apply to 10 or 12 or 15 schools. I don't think that's a particularly healthy thing to do. I would always advise students to try to figure out about 7 to 9 schools to apply to. but we hear with some frequency students applying to many more than that. So there are just more applications out there in the universe. So we typically will have about 20,000 applications for first-year admission. We're on pace right now as we're getting toward the end of our application cycle. We're on pace to have between 20 and 21,000 applications for first-year admission, which is a very healthy number. Now, of course, there are going to be a lot more students who at least think about applying to a school, but don't actually apply. And those students are what we would call an inquiry, okay? An inquiry could be somebody who visits your campus or meets with a representative in our office at a college fair. They have taken some step to learn more about your school. They have raised their hand. And we might have an inquiry pool that exceeds 100,000 students at a given time or for a given year. So to get to 20,000 applications, we have to have a larger inquiry pool. Some students are going to visit campus and say, you know what, this place isn't for me. Hard to imagine, I know, because we think that TCU is perfect, but they might say, you know what, there are going to be some other schools that I'm actually more interested in, and that's okay. Now, before a student is even an inquiry, they are what we call a prospect. Students are prospects and don't even know that they are prospects. So what does that mean? Well, when a student completes one of those exams, like the PSAT, that is given to students in 10th grade or 11th grade, during the registration process, they typically will check a box that says, I'd like to learn more about the colleges, something to that effect. What colleges in turn do is we will purchase leads from the College Board and ACT so that we can start sending out information to you about our institutions. And we have prospect pools that could run well into the hundreds of thousands. In fact, we typically will have somewhere between 400 and 500,000 prospects at a given time. And if you, in case you're ever wondering how, as a junior, you became the most popular person in your house, flooded with mail from every college, those you've heard of and those you have not heard of, that's how it happened. There's a concept that first came about in the 1970s called Enrollment Management. And it became more popular about 30 years ago in the 90s, and has since sort of blossomed into this industry we call enrollment management. It used to be a generation ago, if you were applying to school, you never heard of someone called an enrollment manager. You heard about the director of admission or the dean of admission or something like that. But now we have these people with very fancy titles who never actually talk to students. They just sit there looking at econometric models and spreadsheets, and they're sort of pulling levers to figure out, okay, what is the right number of students we should be admitting, and where should they come from, and what characteristics they should have, and so forth. And as a result of that, you have this whole cottage industry of consultants who are working with the colleges to come to these determinations. So again, this is stuff that has been sort of brewing for a while, but now it's very commonplace. I mean, at almost every college, you'll find somebody whose title has something to do with enrollment management. So that's a big change from the time that we were all going through this process. Ultimately, we're trying to bring in the class. No, that's not right. Okay, if you're a parent on this call, you remember these people, Brenda and Donna and Brandon, and all of our friends there at 90210. Sorry, I forgot to change this. No, we're looking to bring in the class of 22. By the way, that's a shot of a show called Riverdale. I don't know anything about it, but from what I understand, it's very popular with high school students nowadays. Okay, so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring in this class of students. By the way, we're not only trying to admit like the best looking people around. I should be very clear about that. Okay, so how do you apply to college? Again, pretty significant change from how we used to apply to college. I remember sending away for an application. I know this is, I'm dating myself here, but like you sent a letter to a college in the mail and said, I'm interested in applying to your school, please send me an application. And they sent you a paper copy of an application, which we then filled out with a typewriter, or you did it by hand. That doesn't exist anymore. I don't think students today even know what a typewriter is. So no, there are different application forms you could use. Some colleges have their own applications still. So you could log on to the TCU website and fill out the TCU application. But there are other application types as well. So TCU is a member of the Common Application. We're a member of Apply Texas, and we're a member of the Coalition for College. Each of these has its own application. But the reason why a student might choose one of these applications is because it's possible they're applying to 8 schools and all 8 of those schools are on the Common Application. And so rather than filling out 8 different applications, you only have to fill out one application and send it off to 8 schools. And really it's just through the click of a button. So that makes it a lot easier. Now, some schools that are part of these partner applications will ask some school-specific questions on top of all the questions that you have to answer for that are common among the colleges. So that's just something to keep in mind as well. But again, it's quite a bit easier to apply to schools than it once was. The other benefit from a technical standpoint is sending things electronically almost guarantees that the application will get to the right place. I remember quite vividly when I was a student on my college campus working in the admission office, opening up a file and seeing somebody else's application misplaced into that file. And it caused a lot of heartache because the student ended up not getting a decision and they wonder what happened. And the college would say, well, we never got your application. That never happens now. We always get the application if it was sent, or almost always. So that makes it quite a bit easier. Okay, so let's dig into the elements of the application and think through how it is that we go about looking at them. So first and foremost, beyond anything else that a college is going to consider is a student's academic preparation, okay? Because we could think that you are the greatest student in the greatest person in the world. We could think you've got a lot of great characteristics that we might find appealing, but if we don't think you could succeed academically, it doesn't behoove us, nor does it behoove the student for us to offer admission. So the number one thing, and I think any college will tell you this, is academic preparation. And when we're looking at your academic preparation, we are looking not just at the grades that you've earned, but also the courses that you have taken. We expect students to take basically 4 years of everything, okay? 4 years of English, 4 years of math, 4 years of science, 4 years of history, 4 years of a language other than English. Now, I should say, number one, those aren't the minimum requirements. Technically, to be eligible for admission, you can find this in the TCU handbook, the eligibility standards are a little bit lower, okay? But to put you in the best possible position, you're going to want to do that. Now, you might say, okay, I started Spanish 1 in 8th grade, and I've taken Spanish 2, 3, and 4 ending in my junior year. Do I really need a 4th year of high school Spanish, which would be actually my 5th year of Spanish? And the answer is no, you don't necessarily have to do that. But if you're going to drop one class, then we would recommend you pick up a core academic subject in something else. So maybe instead of taking a language other than English in your senior year, if you know you want to major in biology and be pre-med, maybe you take 2 science classes your senior year. Maybe you do AP biology and then you take a human anatomy course as well. So there's obviously variation from student to student, and there's variation from high school to high school. And that's the other thing that's really important for you to understand about how we review applications is we contextualize every student. So we don't expect that a student at one high school is going to have the exact same opportunities and the exact same experience as a student at the other high school. Now, I want to be really clear here. I think this, this visual on the right-hand side of your screen is kind of funny, but but it's worth mentioning that we do not expect that a student will take advanced placement everything, okay? I'm very careful to tell students and parents that we expect students to challenge themselves appropriately in the classroom. That doesn't mean exhaust every advanced class that the school offers, because frankly, there are very few students who could handle that. And I'm speaking from personal experience here. I could not have taken AP every class that my high school offered. I did take some, and I particularly was focused on the ones in the areas of strength for me and of interest for me. And luckily those two intersected. But I would have had a really brutal time taking AP Physics, despite my last name. That would have been a train wreck. So I did not take that class, and I was okay. And so we don't expect every student to take IB or AP or dual credit everything. We do expect that students will challenge themselves appropriately. So if you have earned straight A's through your sophomore year and you have the opportunity to take an advanced course your junior year, we would encourage you to do that. And if you still continue to do well as you head into senior year, also take some additional advanced courses. There's a really practical way in which this plays out in our admission process. And that is, we have studied this, and there have been reports put out by both the College Board and others that demonstrate empirically that students who have taken about 5 or 6 AP courses in high school have proven they can do college level work, and that there is no marginal utility to taking AP courses beyond that. And so at a time when it seems like students are driving themselves nuts, and I mean that literally, like going, having chronic depression because of the layers of work that they put on themselves by taking all of these advanced classes, it just seemed to us that we ought to lower the temperature a little bit on all this stuff. So we actually changed our process a couple of years ago to where, as we're going through our analysis of a student and we're sort of grading them on curriculum rigor, the highest grade a student could earn from our office is if they've taken about 5 or 6 advanced classes. And I actually wrote a blog post about this a couple of years ago. I'm going to put it here in the chat if you want to read this afterwards, about why we did this and how we did this. And I know we are just one college, but I think it's healthy for students not to have to take every advanced class under the sun. Now, let's say you want to. By all means, you should do it. If you would like to do it and you can handle it, and let's be honest, a lot of students will take these advanced classes or dual credit classes to get ahead for college and save some money on the back end. That is totally okay and supported. But we just don't want students to feel like they absolutely have to do that. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit to standardized testing, everybody's favorite topic. And one thing that you should know off the bat is that I think standardized tests have always been misunderstood. There are people out there who probably still have nightmares as adults from taking the SAT or the ACT. Nightmares that, like, you wake up one day and you hadn't studied, and now you have to take this exam that seems like it's going to be the most important test of your entire life. And if you don't do well, that's it. Your life is over. The standardized tests were never that important. Okay, they never played that big of a role in the process. They were important though, and especially at schools that had a very low admit rate, the most selective schools in the country, the tests were pretty important. Now, what you probably know if you've been following the news at all in the last couple of years is that more than half of the colleges have gone either test optional or test free over the last couple of years. When the pandemic hit in March of 2020, the SAT and ACT administrations were canceled left and right. And because of the uncertainty of when and where those tests could be taken, the colleges, in response to that, said, you know what, we're just going to ignore the tests for the time being, and we'll evaluate students on the other elements of the application. The reality is that, number one, a lot of schools have been doing this already. There was a test optional movement afoot, and the pandemic merely hastened that process. And number two, there's enough else in the application that we have a pretty good reading of a student's ability to succeed in college, even without those exams. And so TCU, like many other schools, adopted a temporary test optional policy. At the time, it was for the next incoming class, which is the class actually that just started this year, fall 21. So our current first year students at TCU. We then went to a 3-year model, a 3-year pilot, where we were going to be looking at students in the fall 21, 22, and 23 entering classes. And we're taking this interim period to evaluate the efficacy of the test optional policy. And I suspect that within the next year, we will come out with some statement as to whether TCU is going to revert back to requiring tests or becoming permanently test optional. I should tell you, though, that part of the calculus is what's happening in the market. And I'll give you a really concrete example of this. We get about 15% of our students, roughly, from the state of California. And you might be aware that in California, both the University of California system and the Cal State University system, those are the two large state systems, have already determined that they are no longer going to be considering results of standardized exams. So we are going to have a lot of students in the state of California who are just not going to sit for the SAT or the ACT. That could play a huge role, could have a major impact at TCU if we decide we do want to reinstate standardized tests. We could be cutting off a portion of our applicant pool. So those are the kinds of things that we have to consider when we're making our policy. Okay, so we've talked about grades, we've talked about test scores, but there's more to a student than just data points. I think we would probably all agree on that. And so what else do we look at? Well, we want to see how a student spent their time during high school, because they weren't just in the classroom and they weren't just home studying, but they do a lot of other interesting things with their time. They are athletes and musicians and actors and student government leaders and all sorts of other things. And that's important to us. And it's important to us because we are not just admitting students into the classroom, we are enrolling people into our community. And so we want to better understand what kind of person the student has been in their community. So we look at well-rounded, we look at students. I mentioned the word well-rounded. I want to say something about that, because I think there's this myth out there that colleges are looking for well-rounded students. You might have heard that before. We're not actually looking for a whole bunch of well-rounded students. We are looking to bring in a well-rounded class of students, not just a class of well-rounded students. That's an important distinction, because while there's certainly nothing wrong with being involved in a lot of activities, I think what many college admission people will tell you is sometimes the most interesting students are the angular students, those who have committed themselves to 1 or 2 or 3 things, but have done so with significant depth to those experiences. There's not one right answer to what the co-curricular experience should look like. There's not a set of extracurriculars that a student has been involved with that would guarantee admission at a school. And so when I'm talking to students, I always say, make a list of all the things that you've done in high school and circle what you've enjoyed doing and put a line through the things that you've done because mom or dad or some adult told you you're supposed to do that. And then stop doing those things and only do the things that actually bring you some sense of satisfaction. Because what will happen is 2 things. One, you're going to find you actually have time to become even more involved in that activity, which will stand out in the application process. And number 2, you're going to be a happier person. And high school should be a time of happiness. And that will probably translate into success in your classroom experiences as well. When it comes time to actually putting together the resume, I always tell students, be strategic in what you include. So for example, if you have played the oboe since second grade, it's a great thing to put on your resume. It shows that you have had a long-term commitment to this activity. It shows presumably some talent if you've been doing this for 10 years. And in the case of TCU that has a marching band, it might actually even help you be admitted to the university. What I don't think is quite as important is if you played the oboe in second grade. In other words, we don't need to see a laundry list of every activity you've done for the last 10 years, just the things that really matter. So here are some other things that, that might be important. I think you probably should be able to limit your resume to 2 pages. If I, as a professional who's been working for over 2 decades, can limit my resume to about 3 pages, 2 or 3 pages, a high school student should probably be able to do the same thing. Apply the same rules of English that you would to an essay. So use appropriate grammar and punctuation. Be consistent in that. Use your space efficiently. Again, if we're going to be limiting it to 2 pages, you don't want to take up too much room with things that maybe don't matter quite as much. And then explain unique terms. So if, for example, you're a basketball player, you don't need to say, I shoot an orange spherical object into a 10-foot high hoop. Everybody knows what basketball is. So you just put basketball and maybe the position you played or some achievement you had on the court. If you're using terms that are unique to your school that someone reading the application might not understand, then you need to explain on the application or on your resume what those terms mean. So ex libris and one love, those are examples of school-specific clubs here at a local high school, and you'll want to explain what that means if the same thing applies for you. Okay, now let's talk about the college essay, the dreaded college essay. First of all, the essay does not have to be dreaded. I think that it's actually a really neat opportunity for students to tell us something about themselves. And really, that is one of the 2 major reasons we ask students to write an essay. We want some glimpse into who they are in a way that we can't see by looking at the transcript and the SAT score or even your resume. And so the essay should not be just a rehash of those things. So we want to get to know you. And the second reason it's important is we want to see how well you write. Can you put together a series of cogent thoughts such that we think you're going to be able to do that once you get to college? Because no matter what the student majors in, they're going to have to write. And certainly at TCU, because we are a liberal arts and sciences institution with a core curriculum that will require students to take writing intensive classes, they definitely need to be able to demonstrate the ability to write. So those are the 2 primary functions of the college essay. What I heard years ago, and I think it's a really brilliant thought, I can't take credit for it, but I love it anyway, is a great college essay can heal the sick, but not raise the dead. Meaning, if you're a borderline student or maybe your grades and test scores are a little bit below the profile of the average admitted student, a really wonderful college essay can help push you over the top. But if your academic credentials are nowhere near admissibility, then it doesn't matter how great an essay you write, you're not going to be admitted to the institution. Okay, a couple of other required documents. One would be a recommendation from your college counselor or your school counselor, also known as the school report. This is an opportunity for somebody at your high school to tell the university about you in terms of how you fit into the larger community. That is as opposed to teacher evaluations, and you might be required to submit more than one depending on the college you're applying to. At TCU, we require 1 of them. That is going to focus primarily on what kind of classroom student you have been. And I would always suggest to students as they're thinking about letters of recommendation to get, to find somebody who knows you well. They can talk about your strength of character and how hard you're working in the class, as opposed to somebody who just gave you an A, but doesn't know you all that well. The knowledge the relationship that the student and teacher has developed over some time is really important in helping us understand what kind of student we're going to get in the classroom. Preferably that letter or those letters would be from a junior year teacher, because that is the last full year we have when we're reviewing your application. If you get a teacher who's teaching you in the senior year to write about you, if you apply by our November 1st deadline, you've only known that teacher for maybe 6 weeks or 8 weeks. They probably can't write a really fantastic letter on your behalf, unless they had you, let's say, in 10th grade and then again in senior year, in which case they might even be able to talk about your progression over time. But most of the time, colleges prefer to see teachers who have taught the student in junior year. If a college requires more than one letter of recommendation, it's best if you can find teachers from disparate fields. That way, the college has an understanding of what kind of student you're going to be, not just in your science classes, but also in your humanities classes, because you're going to be a different student in each of those classes. And having that understanding of how consistent you've been across those classes, I think can be really helpful. Okay, everything we have talked about so far, all of these elements make up what we call holistic admission. Holistic means we look at the entire student, as much of the student as they're willing to share with us. There are other factors that are considered as well, and sometimes that has nothing to do with the student at all. We call those institutional priorities. Every college has institutional priorities, and they could range from the composition of the student body, from an ethnic and racial makeup. It could have to do with geographic diversity on campus. It could have to do with what major the colleges are trying to enroll. It could have to do with, do we need more members of our band? And I always use this example, and I think our alumni will really appreciate this. When we joined the Big 12 conference now almost 10 years ago, if you'll recall, it was July 1, 2012 that we joined the Big 12 conference. Before we joined, and when an invitation had been extended to TCU, we thought long and hard about what kind of competition we would be able to put up against these schools that are much bigger than we are on the athletic fields and courts and diamonds and so forth. We gave no consideration to the size of our marching band, which at the time could barely spell out the letters TCU. So from that point forward, we said, boy, we need to do something to incentivize musicians to come to campus. And so we now actually offer a $3,000 stipend to any person who joins the marching band, whether or not they are a music major. And of course, as you would expect, now our marching band is much bigger, and it's great. But that is a true story, and we still do that. So I always tell students, if you play an instrument, you should apply to TCU because you can get some money out of it. And if you don't play an instrument, now is a really good time to learn because you can get some money out of it from TCU. Okay, so how do you know what the institutional priorities are? Well, if you go to a school on a campus visit, if you go to a college, you can ask them, what are your institutional priorities? And I bet you that the person you ask that question to will be extremely impressed because nobody ever asks us that question. So you can do that. The other place you can search for it if you don't want to ask that question aloud and embarrass your children is you can go to a university's website and find a couple of pieces of information. One is every college has a strategic plan. At TCU, we call it Vision in Action, Lead On. I'm sure you've gotten lots of emails and flyers about this over the last several years since we adopted that strategic plan. In the strategic plan, it literally tells people, and it's for public consumption, what it is we are trying to build over the next several years. Every office on our campus creates goals based on the strategic plan. So that is one place you can look. I'll give you another place you can look, and this is, again, for any college that you're considering, and that is called the Common Data Set. Common Data Set. You can do a search for any college. You can say TCU Common Data Set in Google, and you can pull it up. And in response to section C7, or to question C7, which is actually one question with several parts, you're going to see what it is that we think is important in the admission process. Okay, this is going to be very clear for you. You can see that for TCU, the rigor of the curriculum is very important. Class rank, if it's offered, is very important. This is actually a couple of years old. We don't really look at rank anymore because most schools don't do it. And you can see standardized test scores are important. Again, a little bit different. This is a couple of years old, but you get the idea. If you go onto a college's website, every college has to fill this out. So you can find this. And I guarantee you, you're going to be one of like 5 people in the world who does this. Nobody does this. I also want to point out one piece at the very bottom in particular, which I think is really interesting, and that is level of applicants' interest. Here is one massive change in the last 20 years, and that is this idea of demonstrated interest. You might have heard that term before. Demonstrated interest is basically a calculation of what students have done to show the college that they're actually interested in enrolling. And the reason why this is important is because if I have 2 applicants who are otherwise identical, they have the same grades, same scores, same list of activities, in every conceivable way they are the same, but student A visited campus, they came to a session at their high school when we visited them. They met us at a college fair. They've emailed us 100 times. And then we've got student B, again, same credentials, but they have done none of those things. They are what we would call a stealth applicant. The first point of contact with the university is the application itself. Who do you think we are more likely to offer admission to? A college is usually more likely to offer admission to the student who has demonstrated that they actually want to be there. And that might not sound fair, and it might, in fact, not be fair, but that's how a lot of colleges operate. Not every school, and certainly the higher up the food chain, if you look at like Harvard and Princeton and Duke, they're not really caring about demonstrated interest because they know that if they offer a student admission, chances are really good the student's going to come. But at a lot of other places, that can make a huge difference. So I just want you to be aware of that demonstrated interest piece. Okay. I've spoken this whole time and we haven't even talked about legacy, which of course is, I'm sure, fresh on your minds because after all, if you're on this call, you are an alum of the university and you're kind of asking yourself, does my son or daughter have some advantage in this process? And I guess I'd say yes and no. You know, is it fair that students, by virtue of their birth alone, are advantaged based on where their parents attended college? And if your initial thought is, heck yeah, of course it should matter, that seems fair to me. I guess I would ask you the following questions. One, do you believe in the idea of merit, that one should be rewarded for their own work and their own individual efforts? And number 2, are you the child of an alum or the grandchild of an alum? I mean, if you go back far enough, there was somebody in your family who did not go to TCU and somebody had to sort of break the mold. And if we only enrolled alumni children or grandchildren or cousins, et cetera, we would not be able to achieve all of those other institutional priorities that we have. Now, those who are in favor of legacy admission argue that it's in the financial interest of the institution to enact or keep legacy admission policies. The truth of the matter is, and they've done studies on this, the percentage of families, alumni families who donate huge sums of money to where not offering admission would move the needle is actually pretty small. But more to the point, if you sort of widen the pool, you're actually creating more opportunity for donors, a greater donor base. Okay, so all that, it makes it sound like, oh my gosh, this guy doesn't even want us to apply. Not true at all. We love you. We definitely want your students to apply. And if you look at the enrollment at TCU, you would find that a lot of our students do have family ties to the institution. And here's the good news. We absolutely track that stuff. But for us, going back to what I was just talking about before with demonstrated interest, we use legacy as a proxy for interest. Our assumption is if you are a student who has been coming to TCU football games since the time you were in diapers, and you have pictures to prove it, the chances are, if you've gotten to the point where you've applied for admission, you're probably really interested in the university. And we do consider that interest. So that's where I say kind of yes, kind of no, where it very much can play a factor. Okay, I know we only have about 10 minutes left. I want to get to some other really important stuff in terms of sort of what's changed at the university. Okay, mental health. This is a big one. I think we ask a lot of high school students these days. In fact, we ask too much from students. There was a study done about 5 or 6 years ago by the NYU College of Nursing, and they studied 2 private schools in the Northeast, day schools, looking at 11th grade students. And what they determined, and I think you can extrapolate this to 11th graders, even who don't go to private schools or aren't in the Northeast, is that youth experience high levels of stress, which we know compromises mental functioning and fosters risky behaviors. And this chronic stress appears to persist through the college year. So one major change we've seen, I would say even in the last 5 or 10 years, is the resources that colleges are putting into mental health treatment of college students. Because it's not like that stress goes away once students hit college. That carries with them. Going back to that study, about half of the students report completing 3 hours of homework per night. And I can tell you, I was definitely not doing 3 hours of homework per night on average when I was in high school. And girls are 40% more likely to report this than boys. Well, maybe that's why I wasn't doing 3 hours of homework a night. Nearly half of all students feel a great deal of stress on a daily basis. A daily basis feeling a great deal of stress. That has significant long-term impact for students. And grades, homework, and get this, preparing for college were the greatest sources of stress. 26% report symptoms of depression at a clinically significant level. This has massive ramifications. According to a CDC study about 10 years ago, and I would guess that the numbers haven't changed drastically, 17% of American high school students had considered suicide in the previous year, and 8% had attempted it. We are putting so much pressure on our students. So I think as parents, and I put myself in this category because I'm the parent of a high school student, we have an obligation to tone it down and tone it down significantly. And I want to, I think I'm going to end my remarks on this. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And that is, there was an article that came out in the New York Times about 6 years ago, written by an education writer named Frank Bruni. And he wrote a lot about the college admission process, a really, really good writer. And you might have read his stuff. And he had this article, it was right around this time of year when all of the college admission decisions were coming out. And in it, he talked about this family from Long Island, New York. And the son, who was a high school senior, was applying to a lot of highly selective colleges. So think Ivy League schools and the like. And his parents, his name is Matt, and his parents wrote him a letter. And I want to read this letter to you. And they were very clear to write this before he heard his decisions. Okay, so here goes. Dear Matt, on the night before you receive your first college response, we wanted to let you know that we could not be any prouder of you than we are today. Whether or not you get accepted does not determine how proud we are of everything you have accomplished and the wonderful person you have become. That will not change based on what admission officers decide about your future. We will celebrate with joy wherever you get accepted, and the happier you are with those responses, the happier you will be. But your worth as a person, a student, and our son is not diminished or influenced in the least by what these colleges have decided. If it does not go your way, you'll take a different route to where you want to go. There's not a single college in this country that would not be lucky to have you, and you are capable of succeeding at any of them. We love you as deep as the ocean, as high as the sky, all the way around the world and back again, and to wherever you are headed, Mom and Dad. And I'll tell you that as this process has become more anxiety inducing than ever before, and there's so much more uncertainty because of the opaqueness surrounding it, I think as parents, you have really just one responsibility here, and that is to love your children unconditionally. Because if they believe that their self-worth is tied to the result of this process, you could be causing irreparable harm to your relationship. But if they know that you love them no matter what happens, then you can feel confident that they're going to be successful wherever they end up. And thankfully, we've got literally thousands of colleges in this country, and most of them are really, really good. Of course, the best one's TCU. So I'm going to stop talking now. I know we have about 5 minutes left for some questions. So Brooke, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Heath. That letter was wonderful to end on. I love that. Just a couple questions that have come in, and I'll open this opportunity. If you have any questions that you want to try to have Heath answer before we close out, if you want to add that into the question and answer, the Q&A button at the bottom, or you can put it in the chat. But first question was, how do you find out which common applications a particular school participates in?
That's a great question. So earlier on that slide, I showed the common application. That's actually the title of the application, the common app. And there are about, at this point, 900 or 1,000 colleges that participate. And you can go to the Common Apps website and it will list all of the schools. Right. The Coalition for College has a smaller partnership group. I think it's 150 or so colleges. They tend to be the most selective schools in the country. TCU participates with both of those. Apply Texas is every college in the state of Texas, with the exception, I think, of only Rice. I know Rice is not on it. I think every other college, I know every public school, and I'm pretty sure all of the privates except Rice subscribe to Apply Texas. It doesn't matter to the colleges, by the way, which one of those application types you choose. So from the student standpoint, choose the one that you like best. Maybe it has to do with the interface, or maybe it has to do with the essay prompt that's being asked, because those are different from one application type to the next. But as we're reviewing applications, you can use ours or use the Common App or use Apply Texas or use Coalition, and we're cool either way.
Yeah, there's no extra points for a certain application.
Right. In fact, we actually sign a document that says we're not going to show favoritism to students who use the institutional application.
Mm-hmm. Okay, the next question is, are standardized tests required for scholarships? I think you kind of talked about the way things are trending, but you want to kind of visit that one more time, because
sure.
It's an important topic.
It is. It's a very important topic. You got to fund this thing, right? It costs a lot of money. So at TCU, I'll talk about our process. At TCU, we have what we call a do no harm policy. And that means that we are going to not penalize students who don't submit a test score or submit a test score that's lower than what we would consider to be profile. So we will literally run students through our admission and scholarship processes twice, once looking at them with a score and once without a score. And whichever makes them look better, that's what we're going to use. We're interested in painting students in the best possible light. Now, if a student has sat for an ACT and got a 36, which is the maximum score you could get, by all means, submit that score. That's going to help you. So you shouldn't hide the score if you've done well. But to answer the question, one very well could earn a scholarship at TCU without having submitted a standardized test result. And I should also mention, just because it's fresh on my mind, because we just recently went out with our decisions for the John V. Roach Honors College, we have lots of students who are admitted to the Honors College each year without having standardized tests as well.
Good to know. Can you answer also, what is the ACT or SAT's score range?
Sure.
For TCU? I guess you'd have to base this on the current freshman class.
Yes, for those whose scores were used in the process, the middle 50%, and most colleges will report on a mid 50% because it sort of allows the outliers to go away. That middle 50% on the ACT is about 26 to 30. And for the SAT is about 1150 to 1340. I could be off by 10 points here or there, but it's something in that range. That also, by the way, you can find in that common data set, and you can find on our website. We give all sorts of information. In fact, You can also see what the typical grades and scores are for students who earn scholarship. By scholarship level, it will tell you what the in previous years it has been. Of course, that changes a little bit from year to year, and it's not cut and dried. It's not like if you have X GPA and Y test score, you're necessarily getting a scholarship, but it will be a good indicator of how competitive you might be.
Absolutely. Okay, I like this question. Is it appropriate or possible for an applicant to have a face-to-face interview during the application process?
Such a timely question, because we actually eliminated interviews this year. And that was primarily as an equity issue. What we found, well, that was one, there were two driving factors. One, equity. We found that a lot of students who were requesting interviews attended well-resourced schools where they knew they should be requesting interviews. And in a way to sort of level the playing field, we thought, maybe this isn't the way to go. There's another reason, and that's because the students who were requesting interviews often were the students who had already decided TCU was their top choice. They were probably going to apply early decision anyway, and that's the binding application. We didn't even talk about that. And so it just wasn't a great use of the student's time or our time. Now, that isn't to say that we're not going to sit and meet with you. 100%. If you call us up and you say, hey, I would love to sit down with you, I've got a whole bunch of questions, we can do that. We can do it via Zoom. We could, you could come into the office for sure. We've just gotten rid of the evaluative interviews that we had done for many, many years.
Okay,
and frankly, and one other thing, Brooke, they weren't a big part of the process anyway. It was very, very rare that the interview had an impact on the final decision.
Okay, I know we're at time, and there's just a couple more questions I'd love to get to before we close out. Because you mentioned Zoom, visiting campus, and so some of our alumni may be listening from Colorado, or as you mentioned, California or Kentucky, wherever they are. Are you doing Zoom visits? Like, can you talk about what the visit experience is like now?
Brooke, we have so much virtual content. It's really unbelievable. Of course, we have now been open for live visits since June of 2020. I mean, we closed for just a couple of months, and we were one of the first colleges to reopen for visits. And we did it in a way that I think was really safe, and we instituted some pretty robust protocols for obvious reasons. But we're back to basically being sort of pre-COVID in terms of what we're offering on campus. That doesn't mean that every student can make it, though. And one of the things that we found, sort of a silver lining in the last 2-year mess, is that by creating some virtual opportunities, we were able to connect with students who weren't able to get to campus. Some of us in the admission office who travel to particular regions of the country where they're still not offering in-person high school visits are doing visits virtually with high schools. But you'll find on the TCU Admission webpage a whole slew of virtual activities that are available to students. And by the way, we've also created some really cool content with social media. We've got a lot out there on YouTube. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram. There's a lot to see from TCU Admissions.
And let me make that plug. Even though all of our alumni are experts on the campus, things change. I mean, even coming to work here every day, I feel like if I get out and walk to the academic side of campus, I'm like, what? This is new. This is a new program I haven't heard about.
Right.
These are always changing. So have your student go on the official campus tour wherever you go when you're visiting colleges, and especially your alma mater. Of course, they're going to love your stories of, I remember when this was a parking lot. They're going to love it. I know it. Right. But definitely taking the time to have a current student give them that, hey, this is what it's like to be a student now, it's worth the opportunity to, take that time to have your students see it through a current student size. You're
definitely talking about Frog Fountain.
Yeah.
The parking lot and the commons.
Absolutely.
How often do we hear that?
Every day.
It's great.
Okay.
We really do love our alumni. It's amazing.
I know. And there are a few more questions, and those will be recorded. And a couple, someone has also asked it if this will be available. We will be able to share this for those that registered. So thank you for asking that, because I know there's just so many wonderful tips and tricks. And that, if you just watch this by yourself and you're a parent, you can like play it back and be like, look, this expert here said it's true. But one more question about the legacy piece of it. If you already have a student at TCU, does that factor in the decision? Just kind of, going back to that.
Yes. So we track current siblings or siblings who have graduated, either way, in the same way.
Okay.
So it would sort of count the same as if your parent attended TCU.
Okay. Very good. All right. And I'm sorry we were not able to get to everybody's questions. We're so thankful for Heath's time. We're thankful for all of you who were able to join us this evening. And we hope to see you on campus soon with your student taking a tour. And I think that's it. We'll just say go Frogs.
That's it.
Good
Go
night.
Frogs. Good night.
Thank you.